I'm an amateur linguist. Not many people know that about me, but that's because I don't speak any languages fluently. But I do understand and appreciate how languages were formed. As a matter of fact, the very reason why I began animating to begin with was because I wanted to have an entertaining method of presenting information to you guys about language. So, without any further ado, let's talk about Aravonian. I've been wanting to create my own language for quite some time now. But I've never been able to find a good place to start. I mean, I could always just take the really simple route of replacing all of the English roots with my own made-up roots and then jumbling the rest of the letters together, hoping that somehow it would all just fall into place and have a nice little language going on. I actually did do that, and I created a very West Asian, East European sound. I even developed my own alphabet and grammar and colloquial expressions and phrases that when translated into English, they didn't seem to make any sense. I called this language Skedanese. And I gave it a culture and a race of people and an entire history and backstory explaining why they said things the way they did and so forth and so on. It was incredibly complex and cool and everything I would want a language to be, but it was so extremely difficult. I mean, difficult to learn, even for me, despite the fact that I created it. I needed a language that was easy for me, a speaker of the English language, to learn. Now, learning languages were always easy for me. I mean, I don't speak any of them fluently, like I said, but growing up, I had many Spanish friends, and I picked that up relatively quickly. On top of that, I understand some Italian because my grandparents are pretty fluent in it, so I picked some of that up too. Oh, and of course, I can't forget the 2.5 years of French that I took in middle school. And despite the fact that now I don't speak a word of French, I do understand a certain amount of it. And even though I don't speak any of them fluently, I have enough of a basic understanding of them that if I went to a country where they spoke one of those languages, I could probably become fluent relatively quickly. So, why are these languages so simple for me to learn compared to Skedanese? Well, I could give you the complex answer of linguistic tonalities and lexical similarities and all that linguistic jibber-jabber, but to put it simply, these languages all evolved from a single proto-language, or a hypothetical parent's language, through a process called linguistic evolution. Linguistic evolution is the gradual change in human language over time. It involves the origin and divergence of languages and language families. Now, because of this, French, Italian, Spanish, and English are all very similar to each other. As a matter of fact, almost all of the languages in Western Europe are very similar, and all have something in common with each other. So why not make a language that incorporates elements of all Western European languages? Okay, so these languages, they're language groups. What are these so-called language groups? Well, take a look at this map. I put this map together not too long ago. It explains the different language groups in Europe. So you'll see in blue is Finnic, purple is Urgic, yellow is Baltic, red is Slavic, dark green is Hellenic, cyan is Celtic, green is Germanic, magenta is Romantic, and blue-gray is Other. So I'm not going to get too much into the other ones. We're only going to focus on the western half of Europe because those are the ones most influential to the English language. So I wanted to invent a West European language. So that means my language should include elements of Romantic, Celtic, and Germanic languages. Also, I needed to decide on the vocabulary, phonology, and grammar that this language was going to have. So I have 3 language groups and 3 main elements of languages. So why not just pair them together? So I decided that this language that I was going to create would have a Romantic vocabulary with an Anglo-Celtic phonology and a Germanic grammar, specifically English grammar. Now, although English is heavily influenced by Romantic languages and some parts of Celtic languages, it is still technically considered a Germanic language, and its grammar is still technically Germanic. And since English is the only Germanic language I know how to speak, I figured it would be a great place to start. Also, I'm way too lazy to learn an entirely new grammar, so I decided just to use English. I also decided that I wanted to add some letters to my alphabet. So I added the letter She, which would be represented by this letter here, and then I also decided to add the letter Thorn, which would be represented by this letter here. I went in with the understanding that I should come up with my words first before developing the phonology. And I gradually added more and more words to my lexicon until I had about 100 basic words, just enough to form a simple sentence. And then I started writing. I thought it would be interesting to make this language as close to English as possible. You see, as I mentioned earlier, English is heavily influenced by the Romance languages, so I would need to examine as many of the Romance languages as I possibly can and see what they all have in common with English. So I wrote stories, I told jokes, I even wrote affirmations and proverbs. Then I tried translating them into my language. When I came across a word I didn't have, I added it to my lexicon. I wanted to make my language as conversational as possible. So, I needed to find a transcript of a conversation between two average English-speaking people, so I could translate it. Wonder where I could find that. And then it hit me. My text conversations are a perfect place to find normal conversation. Well, I mean, not so normal, but you get what I mean. So I started translating text conversations. I wanted words that I was actually going to use on a regular basis. By doing this, I quickly doubled and then tripled my lexicon. I initially started calling this language Anglo-Romantic because its grammar was based on English grammar, but its lexicon was entirely Romantic. Therefore, this only seemed to be appropriate, until I stumbled across something I found quite interesting. I noticed that there were many English words that were Germanic in origin, but were surprisingly similar to their Romantic equivalent, with the exception of one letter. Specifically, the letter F's relation to the letter P. Now, I had just thought that this was an interesting coincidence, and I just stumbled across it, but look at how many words there are that share this rule in common. Look at this. So the word for in Spanish is por. The word father in Latin is pater. The word fish in Latin is piscis. The word feet in Latin is pede. The word animal skin or felt in Latin is pellis. There is so many, way too many actually, occurrences of this to be a simple coincidence. So I started digging and stumbled across the writings of the multilingual Jacob Grimm. That's right, the very Jacob Grimm that was a part of the infamous Brothers Grimm, that collected and published a series of folklore and tales in their 2-volume book Kinder- und Hausmärchen, Children and Household Tales. Perhaps you've heard of the story Rapunzel, or maybe Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, Puss in Boots, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, the Queen Bee, Golden Goose, Shrek? Well, maybe not Shrek, but you get the idea. Jacob Grimm was also a linguist and philologist. Philology is the branch of knowledge that deals with the structure, historical development, and relationships of a language or languages. Because of Grimm's extensive knowledge in linguistics, he wrote the book Deutsche Grammatik, German Grammar, published in 1819. In 1822, however, he released a second edition of Deutsche Grammatik, where he mentions the first Germanic sound shift, which was later given the term Grimm's Law. Grimm makes reference to philologist Friedrich von Schlegel, who first noted the correspondence between Latin P and Germanic F. Grimm stuck to the idea that in order for philology to be well-founded, it must be based on the laws of sound change. This gave to all of his research a firm consistency and conviction that distinguishes science from the amateur hobby of a man who writes fairy tales. Frankly, in my opinion, Grimm was ahead of his time in the science of linguistics, and his contributions also inspired other linguistics to add to his research. So, I decided to apply some of those grammatical principles to my language. So the word for remained for. The word fish became fish. The word father became vater. The word feet became feds, literally the plural of foot, which would just be fed. And skin became felis. Then it occurred to me, is it technically a Romance language if it applies Grimm's law of sound change? Because those laws explain the differences between Latin and Germanic languages. Technically, yes. Since all the words originated in Latin, regardless of the fact that they've changed over time, they are still technically Latin-based. And that is the only determining factor for a language to be classified as Romantic. Grimm's law suggests that Germanic and Romantic are branches of a much larger language group known as the Indo-European language family. So, in theory, my language is still, in its strictest definition, a Romance language. But that raises more questions. If I wanted this language to be as realistic as possible, then how did this language come about? Why do they pronounce the way they do? Who speaks this language? How many people speak it? What are the different stages of this language? Are there different dialects of this language? As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I decided to call it Aravonian, so why did I decide to call it that? Well, I will answer those questions in part 2 of this video. Thank you for watching. Okay, so it's been several months since I've recorded this audio, and I haven't done anything with it at all. And I realized you guys are probably going to want to hear what this language sounds like, right? Well, don't worry. I'll give you a couple of samples.
Ben Jordan, my name is Brody. What is your name? Chalet, my name is Senior Bog. Un pleasure at concerto. Ver tu parler English? No, jij solament parler Aravonian e Duits. Ver tu parler Duits? No, jij parler English e Aravonian, but not Duits. Tu parles muito bem. Great. Anche tu. Et era parlant con tu. Tenum Ben Jordan. Great. Anche tu. Un'altra volta. Chalet. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I know this was a bit long and grueling and very educational, not like my other videos, but I wanted to, do this because this was my original intent of what I wanted to do. I know I messed up a couple times because I did most of it in one take. I went back much later and did other takes later on, but thank you so much for watching this video. Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because that's really important. If you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to give bumblebees wings. Everybody knows that every time one of my videos gets a like, a bumblebee gets his wings. Give the bumblebees their wings. Come on, guys, you can do this. Anyways, don't be thugs, my bumblebugs. I will catch you in the next video.